Hey, everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up Warchant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, in the heart of College Town. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up Warchant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Monday, July the 31st to you and yours. One more day till we're in August, and we're on fall camp. It's kind of hard to believe, ladies and gentlemen, but football is literally that close, and for a lot of us listening out there and talking, it's a pretty big deal. It's an awesome thing. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. Drew's not on the other side of the glass today. Drew's actually Drew's on a little bit of a break. We'll see him in a couple weeks, but for right now, we're going to have a lot of folks coming in over the next couple weeks. We're going to have a lot of fun, and I think to a certain extent, we're going to try to get as many voices as possible over the next couple weeks, just because if you've read and you've seen some of the information, you've seen some of the stuff that there are folks who think this is a national title contender. There are folks who think that Florida State's overrated. There are folks who just don't know what to think of the Seminoles. There's a lot of differing opinions about this Florida State squad, its strengths, its weaknesses, how far it can go with some of those weaknesses, how much the strengths can make up for some of those weaknesses. There's a lot of opinions about this year's squad, and we owe it to you to give as many of those voices credit as possible, and we owe it to you to give you as informed as possible. I mean, that's why we have this hour together, so we can come together and we can talk about local issues, and we can talk about Florida State, and we can talk about the football program and the rest of the programs as a whole. So look out for that the next couple weeks. We're going to have a pretty fun time previewing this 2017 season with you. Like I said, Drew will be back soon, but for now, you're stuck with me. And I appreciate you being stuck with me here at 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio or your streaming devices, the WTSM app, the TuneIn Radio app, of course. Your podcast, you know where it goes, iTunes, Podcast Republic, warchantradio.com. Of course, it's even on YouTube now, if that suits your fancy. If you're one of those folks who likes to listen to music on YouTube or fall down a podcast rant loophole every now and then, well, that's no different. Just go to the Warchant YouTube page and find us there. Then, of course, radio@warchant.com is the email address. You don't just have to listen to the show. You can talk back to us as well. And at Wake Up Warchant, that Twitter account as well. And then, of course, finally, you know, as always, we're brought to you by our good friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central, Township, all right there in the heart of College Town. It's going to be a happening place. Well, I mean, Madso and the like are always happening, but you know what I'm trying to say. As football season gets a little closer, students get back in school, Tallahassee's about to go back to being Tallahassee, and that's great for everything, literally except the traffic. But overall, it's good to be here with you. We've only got a couple things of business to get to in this first segment, mostly because last night we pre-recorded a very, very long conversation with Ira Schoffel. You're going to hear that for the majority of the hour today. But before we get to that, I did want to address a couple things, and that's, first of all, Jimbo Fisher changing guys and their position. A 3-star wide receiver by the name of Xavier Rhodes signed with Florida State, and Jimbo Fisher said, you know what? I think you're more talented on the other side of the ball. And I don't know what it is about Jimbo. I don't know why he's so dang good at this. And I know what a homer I sound like when I say that. But you look at the track record, folks, and it stands up. Xavier Rhodes became one of the highest paid corners in the NFL yesterday when he signed a 5-year, $70 million contract. $70 million. 41 of that guaranteed. That's nice. That's a nice chunk of change, my friends. Congratulations to Xavier. He always seemed like such a really good dude when he was here. And, well, let's face it, he kind of helped keep that Vikings team and that defense afloat at times. Because Minnesota just seems like a team that never really can piece it together. That Favre team, that first-year Favre team, when they didn't make it to the Super Bowl, it's been all downhill from there. But who knows? It's a step in the right direction when you know you've got a lockdown corner like that. So congratulations to Xavier. For their sake, if you're a Skull Vikings fan listening to me, I hope Bridgewater gets healthy for you. Other piece of Florida State news to get to, Champions Club, according to the Tallahassee Democrat, going to go throughout a couple changes. Makes sense. Need to make sure people are in their seats. There are obviously a couple more seats sold last year than what there actually looked like on TV or in the stands. But, you know, it was a problem and it was an issue. And I'm happy that Seminole Boosters is addressing it. And it starts with the idea that misters are going to be put in to that that upper level. That way they can get rid of some of that heat and some of that humidity. It's actually supposed to lower the actual outside temperature around 10 to 20 degrees if you're in that mister. So that's good stuff. You have that. You have the idea that folks are going to be able to actually order their food and drink from within their seats. I'm actually a little surprised the Champions Club didn't already have that, because I know they do that at the Tucker Center. That's kind of the norm in some club areas, not like huge NFL stadium club areas, but that's a good idea. The idea that if you are going to be a national title contender, like a lot of folks think you are, and you're going to have primetime spots on a lot of games, like a lot of people think you are, and a couple of those are coming at home, especially that Miami game early on in the year, you ought not have a Champions Club, a club section, a premium seating area, whatever you want to call it, that looks empty. Even if it's sold out, even if the thing is supposed to be packed to the brim, you can't have everybody hanging out inside watching the game on TV. And I think that's partially the problem that we've run into in this age of everybody wants to premium seat their stadium, and everybody wants to make it to where everything is about the experience, not just the game. The game isn't good enough because you can see the game great on TV. The idea that you have to have butts in seats, not just bought for, but actually there to help build that atmosphere, because you're still selling that atmosphere to recruits. You're still selling that atmosphere to potential guys maybe wanting to go to your school. You got to sell yourself and that program. And I think having a club section that's full, some of your more, I'd say, better off fans, knowing that they're actually in the stands rooting for you. And that's no shot at the folks who bought Champions Club tickets, because you knew even if they weren't there, they were probably watching the game inside. But just the optics of having folks out in their seats watching the game, that's a good thing. I applaud Seminole Boosters. I applaud Jerry Coots and those guys for doing that. Only got time for a real quick catch-up here, but here it is. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Why You Were Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake me up! Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
All right, like I said, can't get to everybody, but I'll get to the baseball scores that I can. Tigers over the Astros 13-1. Rays over the Yankees in Yankee Stadium 5-3. Blue Jays outlast the Angels 11-10. In Toronto, it's the Reds who go to Marlins Park and get themselves a W 6-4. Royals over the Red Sox 5-3. Phillies over the Braves 2-1. Goodness gracious, Braves, what are you doing out there? That was a horrible series you lost against the Diamondbacks, and now, is that an actual sweep? Yeah, it's a sweep. You get swept. No, excuse me. My apologies. There's one more game. There's a game today, 12:35 p.m. between these two teams. Either way, Atlanta was 500 2 weeks ago, and now they're just there and losing series to the Phillies. You ought not be doing that. Cubs continue their winning ways after the All-Star break. It's 4-2 Chicago over Milwaukee at the Brewers ballpark. 3-2 at Busch Stadium. Thus, the St. Louis Cardinals victorious over the Arizona Diamondbacks. Something I didn't get to mention last week. Congrats to Luke Weaver starting for the Cards last week. Got it done for them. Orioles 10-6 over the Rangers. Finally, I will tell you that the Mariners defeat the Mets 9-1. When we come back, it's Ira Schoffel for the rest of the hour here on Wake Up Warchant 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Wake Up Warchant on 97.9 ESPN Radio is presented by TNT Golf Cart Supercenter, your one-stop shop for all your outdoor entertainment. Here's Ryan Kelly.
Leaving home out on the road. I've been down before.
Rolling along on a fall camp eve edition of Wake Up Warchant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central, Township, all there right in the heart of College Town. As promised, managing editor of Warchant.com, Mr. Ira Schoffel, here with us for the lion's share of the hour, joining us on the phone line. Ira, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. It's kind of interesting to know that we're finally here. This weekend, every time, it never fails, no matter how many times, whether it's as a fan or media. I don't know if it feels this way as a player or coach, but I know this. The week that fall camp finally hits, it just kind of seems surreal that we're back here.
Yeah, and, I think the part of the issue this year particularly is just with ACC kickoff being so much earlier, being about a week earlier than usual, you just had over 2 full weeks once we got back before they actually started practicing. So it's kind of like you had ACC kickoff, everybody got excited talking about FSU and Clemson and DeAndre Francois and Derwin James and all the excitement about the conference, and then you kind of have to sit and wait a couple weeks, and then now here it is again. So, in a weird way, it almost gives it enough time to kind of sneak up on you again. Yeah,
and of course we roll around. We hear from Jimbo Fisher tomorrow. It's kind of interesting to know that it's already here. I know I already said that, but it's worth noting, it's worth repeating, it's worth kind of sinking in that football is finally back. And of course, one of the biggest indicators that football is finally back is usually the top 40 players that we often do on Warchant.com. I've been able to talk with Gene a little bit about this list, and now, Ira, I get to chit-chat a little bit about it with you. First of all, just overall throughout the list, not even counting the top 10 at the moment, but just 11 through 40. I want you to speak your piece. Was there a guy that you felt was too high? Was there a guy that you felt was too low? I want to give you a chance to speak your piece, my friend.
It's tough to say. I mean, the fun thing about those lists is, they start a lot of debate. And I think that, and the way we compile it is, Jeff Cameron, myself, Gene Williams, we sit down and we each do our own top 40s and then we combine them. And it's interesting to see kind of how they all match up. And, there's a few guys that I have much higher than they do. One that I had way higher than either of them did was Darvin Taylor, defensive tackle, who hasn't really played a down of college football yet, even though he's going into his third season at Florida State. I think he checks in somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 or low 30s, even though he hasn't played this season, or he hasn't played in a game in college yet. He was a very highly touted recruit coming out of high school in Virginia a few years ago. Had shoulder injuries, had a severe shoulder injury. I think that kind of dates back to high school. He had surgery on it when he got here. It really has kind of kept him out of playing. But this spring, I thought he was sensational this spring. Jimbo raved about him on several occasions. Then we got to see him in the spring game, and I was really impressed by the way he played. So I had him pretty high. I think I had him in the 20s. I think Jeff and Gene had him closer to the later 30s. So that's kind of how he ended up in the around 30-ish or low 30s. And some people, I think, some of the fans and readers were like, what in the world? Why would you have this guy who hasn't even played it down in college football? You'd have him ahead of some other guys who have played and certainly will play this year. But again, it's kind of a little bit of it is kind of guessing based on what we saw in the spring. And again, Darvin Taylor didn't play the last 2 years, not because he wasn't capable of playing, but because he was banged up and recovering from a major shoulder surgery. So that's one we took a little flyer on. I think it's probably higher than most people probably expected. And then, there's a couple, I think the player that probably is much lower than, some fans wanted to see. And I think we're setting ourselves up to be second guessed for sure is, the starting center, Alec Eberle, who we have lower than several of the other offensive linemen. I mean, if you look at the guys who are expected to start on the offensive line, you talk about Landon Dickerson and Rick Leonard and Cole Minshew and either Josh Ball and Alec Eberle. I think Eberle might be the lowest or the second lowest rated of those offensive linemen, even though he's the guy that's a 2 or 3 year starter. and was a preseason All-ACC pick. Now, in our defense, I think the reason we kind of rated him a little bit lower and was because, he's coming off a major hip surgery where they actually, Jimbo Fisher, when we were down in Orlando the other night, kind of described the surgery, something we hadn't heard really before, that they actually shaved like an inch of bone off of his hips to help him kind of with his flexibility. And, that doesn't sound like a great procedure. And, we haven't seen him yet, so we don't know 100% sure whether or not he's going to be totally good to go for the start of camp. So that's one reason we had him a little lower. And then also he's going to be really challenged by Bavion Johnson, Andrew Baselli, even a fourth-year junior and Corey Martinez. So, those are the kind of the reasons we had him a little bit lower rated. But I understand why fans will look at it and say, how could you have him below some of these other guys like Landon Dickerson and Cole Minshew, who have only started, a handful of games in their careers?
Yeah, and I think it all overall also goes to, is this a list of the top 40 best players, or is it a list of the top 40 most important players? It kind of goes to the idea, when you and I have debated the top 25 and the AP poll before, Ira, is it the top 25 best teams now? Is it the top 25 teams that you think will be the best at the end of the season? There's such subjectivity that you love the arguments that it brings up.
Yeah, 100%. And then, with the top 25, the fault, or I guess the faulty, the way it's set up kind of leads to that kind of debate, is because the AP doesn't tell its voters how to vote. They can vote however they want. They can pick the top 25s right now. They can pick the top 25 teams that have had the best seasons to this point, or they could pick the 25 that they think are going to be there at the end of the season. It's really up to each independent voter, which leads to some kind of crazy decisions throughout the year. But with this, the goal was to go with the 40 players we expect to have the biggest impact. In other words, be the most important, not necessarily the 40 most talented. But even with that said, you have to ask yourself, are you talking about in week one, or are you talking about over the course of the entire season? Because that's a challenge as well. You've got guys like Landon Dickerson's coming back from a torn ACL. He may be a different player in week 5 or week 8 than he is in week 1. Alec Everly, the same thing, coming off hip surgery. So, there are a lot of variables anytime you do these lists. Again, they're fun to talk about, but, you can kind of talk yourself into a lot of different standards based on each player's individual situation.
So we get into the top 20. You guys released that part of the top 40 over the weekend, numbers 20 through 11. And it's worth noting a lot of wide receivers here. There's Keith Gavin. I mean, to a certain extent, there's tight end Ryan Izzo. Of course, there's Auden Tate on this list. There's a lot of guys that need to step up there. And I think it goes without saying, a lot of it has to do with the depth there.
Yeah, and Keith Gavin's another one that, is kind of a tricky situation because, again, you talk about a guy who we think is going to have a big impact because he's basically penciled in, is that number 3 wide receiver. Nooney Murray and Auden Tate, almost by all accounts, will be the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers this season, coming off of really, solid sophomore years, and they're the most experienced guys. And then Keith Gavin being that number 3 guy, that's why we have him in that top 20. I mean, it's essentially a starter when they're going with 3 wide receivers. But at the same time, he has caught 0 college passes. His only really offensive player, his only real statistic as a college football player last year as a true freshman came on that 66-yard kickoff return against Michigan in the Orange Bowl. So, kind of the combination of, he's going to have a great opportunity to have an impact because he's going to be that number 3 wide receiver. And then number 2, he's very talented, big, strong kid, 6'3", 225 or so, very athletic. I think Jimbo Fisher said recently that Keith Gavin may be the fastest wide receiver they have, or certainly one of the 2 probably fastest wide receivers. So, that's kind of a projection where we think he's going to have a huge impact. But I could, you certainly argue that, that's too high to have a guy in the top 20 that hasn't really done anything on the college level yet.
Well, I think that just kind of speaks to the need that Florida State needs him, and they need a consistent number 3. And, I mean, let's be honest, they need Nooney Murray and Auden Tate to deliver on what you saw from them at the end of last year. You certainly hope they can, but overall, you need playmakers to step up. And, you mentioned the 60-some-odd yards that he ends up penciling into the Orange Bowl. This is not to take anything away from that run because it was a remarkable kickoff return, but we're him not bouncing off a guy away from saying, what a stupid decision.
Yeah, if that guy had gone a little lower and maybe dove at his ankles, that might have tripped him up. That might have been a difference. But that goes to, you have to give Keith Gavin the credit for having the size and the strength for a guy to bounce off him. I think if you look at, if that had been Kermit Whitfield or if that had been Bobo Wilson, if he was healthy, or if it had been even Travis Rudolph, a lot of guys would have just crumbled when a guy dives and leaps at him at full speed. Instead, Keith Gavin at that great size, the guy just bounces off of him. So, and then in the spring before he sustained an ankle injury, Keith Gavin apparently in the first week or two of spring was really having a sensational camp. They were really impressed with him as one of the main receivers. So I think that's going to stick. And like you said, with Auden Tate, Ryan Izzo, the one thing that you notice with all those guys is they're big, long, huge targets for DeAndre Francois. Auden Tate, 6'5", 6'6". Ryan Izzo's a big, lanky tight end. I think that when you lose Dalvin Cook last year, so much of the offense was built around Dalvin Cook. I think that also speaks to the idea that we think they're probably going to be throwing the ball a little bit more now that DeAndre Francois has more experience and you don't have Dalvin Cook in the backfield.
Keeping with the offense, I know we've talked about it a lot, but another guy who's on this list, at least in this portion of the list, is Jacquez Patrick, the guy who, by all accounts, is probably going to be the number one starting tailback going into this season. I will say this, Cam Akers is not on this list yet. Am I supposed to expect him in the top 10?
Yeah, I think you are going to see Cam Akers in the top 10, and that's one where, I think we're just kind of reading the tea leaves, that we think he's going to have a more impact. And when I say we, I think Jeff Dean and I independently, but probably also as a group, I think we all think that Cam Akers this season, over the course of a season, is probably going to have a bigger impact than Jacquez Patrick. That's not to say that that's going to happen in week one. That's not going to say that's going to happen in week two. But over the course of 13, 14, 15 games, we think Cam Akers is going to be the guy that emerges at that position. And again, that's a little bit of it's a little bit of a projection. It's a little bit of a shot to predict that, because Jacquez Patrick has played 2 full seasons, has rushed for over 300 yards each of those years, has had some 100-yard games, has a lot more experience than Cam Akers. I think they're going to both end up carrying the ball a whole lot. I think they're both going to play a lot together. I think you'll also see Amir Rasul get in there as well. But if Cam Akers is as good as everybody around the program talked about this spring, what they saw of him, and then we got to see him in the spring game, and then obviously people had seen him in high school, he's got great work ethic. He's a very explosive guy. He runs very physically, has probably a little bit more burst than Jacquez Patrick. I think over the course of the year, he's going to end up having a bigger impact, even though that may not be the case in the first couple of games of the season.
And this is where the argument comes back to me in the best player versus important player. Jacquez Patrick, because I don't think anybody really expects Cam Akers to come out against Alabama and look like he's been in college for 3 years and ready to go. But early on in this season, you've got 2 very, very big and very, very important games in Alabama and Miami, and you're more than likely asking Jacquez Patrick to carry the load against 2 really good teams.
Yeah, I think, and again, I think you'll see both of them in the backfield together at times, and I think you'll see. What's interesting is it's not like the one thing about those guys is it's not like they're a huge difference in each other. It's not like Jacquez Patrick and Dalvin Cook, where you've got like a real thunder and lightning kind of combination. Akers is a physical guy too. He's got good size. He's bigger than Dalvin Cook was. He's not quite as dynamic in terms of open field speed and elusiveness that Dalvin Cook had, but he's probably got more of that than Jacquez Patrick. And I think what's going to be interesting to watch is to see how Jimbo manages those backs, their carries, and then also sprinkles in, an Amir Rasul, maybe a Kalen Laybourne, the other 5-star recruit they got out of Virginia. He's got a lot of weapons to kind of tinker with. But, to your point, I think when you look at the fact that you're going to be using a whole lot of new faces on offense in that first game. You're talking about a new fullback you're going to have a new fullback. You're going to have a couple of new wide receivers. You're going to have one or two new offensive linemen. I think Jarquez Patrick will give DeAndre Francois just a comfort level because he's a guy that's played a lot of college football. You don't want too many guys out there, really getting their first taste, especially, again, like you said, against Alabama or Miami.
I already mentioned it. This is a very offensive-heavy portion of the list. But coming in at number 12 is Jacob Pugh, and coming in at number 11, Brian Burns. Kind of a tale of two different dudes. Jacob Pugh, of course, a senior who turned it on last year, and Brian Burns, a guy who out of the gate did a lot of things that people didn't exactly expect of him.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really good point. I mean, they really illustrate the two different ways, the two different approaches, I guess, or circumstances that affect college football players. And Jimbo talks about this all the time, that, we expect everybody to be the Brian Burns. You're really highly touted coming out of high school. You're one of the best players in the country. You should come in and make an impact right away. Brian Burns does that. He comes in, 9.5 sacks as a true freshman. Didn't even play a ton of plays. I mean, he was more situational guy. I think he had 24 total tackles and 9.5 sacks in that mix. So, he's a guy that really was used specifically as a pass rusher and did really well there. Jacob Pugh, on the other hand, is a guy who, if you just looked at after his first or second season, you might have said, oh, this guy hasn't panned out to be what he was supposed to be. He also was a 4-star prospect. He was supposed to be a much bigger impact guy than he's been, but he battled some injuries. He also battled just kind of understanding what was expected of him at the college level. The coaches kind of had a lot of, it took a while to kind of get through to him and explain to him the work ethic that was needed and him to really buy into what they were doing and how they were using him. But last year you saw him come on. And Jimbo, makes this point all the time, is this is how college football used to be. Guys had 2 or 3 years to figure it out, and then they could have their, big junior and senior years and get ready for the NFL. Well, Pugh last year had 40-plus tackles, 6 or 7, tackles for loss. Was kind of an impact player, and then continue that in the spring with a huge spring. They raved about him every day, said he might have been the best player all spring, and they did give him that award as basically the MVP of the spring. So he's a guy they expect big things from. But like you said, a year ago or a year and a half ago, most people would have been surprised to see Jacob Pugh this high on this list because his first two and a half seasons didn't show this kind of potential necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a tale of two guys going down two different paths, and if they can both sustain them, that'd be huge for Florida State on defense. Well, we're going to keep Ira Schoffel on the line for a little bit, and we're going to chat a little bit about spring in general. Or excuse me, not spring, fall. It's so hot, it just feels like spring. But I should be used to that. I lived in Florida all my life. Whatever. There's no excusing it. We're back with more after this. It's Wake Up Warchant, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online. How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new Warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in Warchant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on Warchant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
Wake Up Warchant on 97.9 ESPN Radio is presented by TNT Golf Cart Supercenter, your one-stop shop for all your outdoor entertainment. Here's Ryan Kelly.
Shorty it down, good Lord. Baby got them open all over town. Strictly bitch, you don't play around. Cover much grounds, got game by the pound.
We return to Wake Up Warchant 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, all there in the heart of College Town. We welcome back Mr. Ira Schoffel, the managing editor of Warchant.com. Ira, when we last came back, we were talking about the top 40 players, and of course that list, you can see the final part of that list sometime this week on Warchant.com, so stay tuned for that. But, of course, we've got pressing matters, actual football to talk about. Tomorrow, Jimbo Fisher is speaking to the media, and I wanted to ask you, because I feel like it's been a while since we've had you on, and now we kind of get to stare straight at football season in the face. Just your honest opinion. What is the biggest question going into this season for Florida State? And here's the caveat, Ira, and I think you know what's about to come. You can't say offensive line.
I actually was just telling myself when you started saying that I was going to try to not say offensive line because, I'm starting to think maybe I guess I've listened to Jimbo so much over the last month between ACC kickoff and then when we were down in Orlando, and then when he was on the ESPN car wash, he's starting to brainwash me. I'm starting to think this offensive line is going to be just fine. So
starting to trust the process a little.
So I'm starting to. I think he's turning me on that one. So yeah, I won't go there. I guess I'll go with wide receiver. I think that there's a lot of eggs in that Nooney Murray basket, and nobody thinks higher of Nooney Murray's talent. When I keep saying Nooney Murray, we need to come to some sort of consensus if we're going to go with Nooney or Naquan or interchangeably. But Naquan Murray, Nooney Murray, his potential is off the charts. I mean, everybody you watched him play, you saw some of the amazing plays he made. Most notably, obviously, in the Orange Bowl against Michigan, he basically won them that game as much as anybody else. And so there's a lot to love there, but at the same time, there's a reason he hadn't played much as a freshman. There's a reason he hadn't played much halfway through his sophomore year, and it's because, it's the same reason that during spring practice he seemed to be in the doghouse a little bit, where Jimbo had made him wear took away his jersey number and made him wear a lineman's jersey number. So they've had issues with him throughout his career. Not that he's a bad kid, but just, maturity issues, just trying to get him to be focused and dependable and all those things that, a Jimbo Fisher coach team, that they want those guys to, be much more dependable, accountable, every play of every practice, show up and do exactly what you're told. And, he's a little bit more of a free spirit. And I just think that if you think about that, something's going to have to give. Either that guy has to totally change who he is and be that Mr. Dependable this season that Jimbo wants and get on the same page with DeAndre Francois and be that guy, or, is it possible that Jimbo relaxes on some of his demands and accepts that this guy's a little bit of a free spirit and kind of takes the good with the bad, or do they butt heads? And do you have a situation where maybe there's times he isn't playing as much as he normally would because they've got some issues? So for those reasons, I just think that everybody's assuming Naquan Murray's going to step into that number one role and be a superstar based on his potential. But I think there's going to have to be some coming together there between player and coach, because if they butt heads, I think it could adversely affect the offense.
I'm with you there. I think at this point we kind of know who Nooney is, and of course we know who Jimbo Fisher is. I don't think either of them are going to completely bend to the other's will. I'm with you. There has to be a come-to-Jesus meeting where these two kind of are going to have to realize you need to play by the rules, but at the end of the day, we also need you. So that's got to get worked out as a whole.
Yeah, and it may very well have happened during this offseason. But again, if you go back to the end of after the Orange Bowl, I think Jimbo Fisher made comments about how, Naquan Murray, he's got all that potential. He needs to step up and be more dependable and accountable. Then Travis Rudolph goes pro. Travis Rudolph declares he's going to leave for the NFL. Then you go into that spring practice, and Jimbo clearly had conversations with Murray during that time between the end of the season and spring practice said, hey, we need you to be that guy. You've got to be our number one guy. And it apparently hadn't sunken in because, he had that issue during the spring where he took his number away. And it wasn't for all of spring. It was only for a day or two. But again, it just kind of shows that it wasn't perfect. And then when we talked to Jimbo at ACC kickoff about Naquan, he was complimentary of him, but he didn't just go overboard gushing about him either. So that's going to be one thing to really watch this preseason. And there have been guys that totally get it and conform, and there are others that not. I'd compare him a lot personality-wise, and I don't know Naquan Murray very well. It's hard for us to get super close to a guy like that because he was off limits to the media as a freshman. And then last year, even when he started playing a lot, they kept him off limits because he is prone to say a lot of things and kind of talk maybe out of school a little bit. So he's been very limited to the media, but just watching his personality at practice with teammates, things like that, he reminds me a lot of Greg Reed. And Greg Reed was a superstar player, had a great career, had a ton of big plays for Florida State, but ultimately ended up getting kicked out and didn't finish his career for Florida State. And so, it doesn't always, the transformation isn't always perfect, and it'll be interesting to see how that kind of all plays out.
Defensively, man, the biggest question to me has to be, does this team look like the defense it's supposed to be? I know that's vague. I know that's kind of soft factor-wise, but let's face it, loafing was a word that you didn't hear much around the Florida State program, around at least since the Jimbo Fisher era, until last season. And it was a word that came up again and again and again. Now, here's the thing. I hope you're motivated to play the Alabama Crimson Tide first game of the year, because if not, who else are you going to be motivated for? But that, to me, is just kind of going to be the biggest question of this defense. Do they respond to Charles Kelly and that staff and what they're selling?
Yeah, and, I think, again, some of that has to go on the coaching staff. I'm a believer, and again, this is why I'm not coaching. This is why I'm not getting paid a lot of money to do what those guys do. I'm not saying it would work, but I'm like a lot of fans, and people in the media. When you watch it and you see players not giving their all on a specific play, and a play that should be a play that they have a chance to make, or at least should keep competing on, you ask yourself, well, why is that guy in the game? Why, how do you tolerate that? And if you tolerate that, is it going to, how is it ever going to stop? And so I think it's on the coaches. And I felt like it was on the coaches at that time. That wasn't, the one play that everybody remembers, of course, was the play where Josh Sweat, I think it was Matthew Thomas, that were kind of trailing the play from behind against North Carolina. And clearly we're not running full speed. But there were other plays in that game, and there had been other instances before. And I know that, football's a rough sport. Those guys play a ton of. It takes a tremendous amount of effort and energy, and you can't just be benching people all the time. But I think it's on the coaching staff to demand that excellence. It can't. On the one hand, it needs to come from the players, but it can't always come from the players. Sometimes the coaches have to, hold those guys accountable and challenge them, because the issue with a defense like this, where you have so much returning talent, so many guys have played and ostensibly have their jobs locked up, is if you don't have competition, then you may not have guys working as hard as they need to. So I think this is an important, as you kind of said, I think it's an important camp in early season for Charles Kelly to make sure that those guys are not only giving it everything they have, but also executing the game plan, not freelancing, because there's a lot on the line early this season. Their toughest games, really, of the season are probably going to, at least a couple of them are going to be in those first few weeks with Alabama and Miami and NC State.
Ira, it doesn't even have to be a position thing. It doesn't have to be a question on one side of the ball or the other. What do you feel like is the biggest strength or weakness of this team in this season that nobody's talking about?
I think the probably, and it's a little bit obscure, but probably the tight ends. I think that, in terms of a position that a lot of people aren't talking about, I think, Ryan Izzo is fantastic. I think he's a fantastic college tight end. He's now basically a 3-year starter. He started several games as a freshman, then was the starter last year. He's coming back as a third-year guy, and he's become much more dependable over that time. Maven Saunders now has been in the system 3 or 4 years, a guy that didn't play a lot of high school football, but was a tremendous athlete, was a Division I basketball prospect. He now understands things, has a much better feel for things. I think they're planning to use him as some at wide receiver to get him on the field more. And then you've got some other younger tight ends that have shown a lot of potential as well. So I think that's a position, especially as DeAndre Francois gets a better feeling for the offense. And I think, if you think of the great quarterbacks, if you think of the Jameis Winston, Nick O'Leary, a lot's been made about Nick O'Leary's numbers and compared to what they've been the last couple of years where FSU hasn't thrown to the tight end as much. That's usually a product of a quarterback who really understands the offense. And a lot of times the tight end has got the best matchup. A lot of times those wide receivers are going to be the first reads. And a lot of times the young quarterbacks are going to go that way. DeAndre Francois or Everett Golson, who didn't understand the offense as well the year before. I think that DeAndre, as he gets a better feeling for the offense, I think he's going to go to those tight ends a lot more. Maybe not as much as Jameis Winston did with Nick O'Leary, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was pretty close.
I mean, there were times where Winston would go to O'Leary to his detriment. At times in that 2014 season when
he trusted him so much. Yeah.
Teams figured it out, they bracketed him, and, it didn't always end well.
Yeah, but again, it's a huge weapon, especially if you haven't been doing it. I think because Florida State has not been doing it so much the last couple of years, I think Izzo may have had about 19 catches last year, which is, you're talking about maybe 1 or 1.5 catches a game. That's not going to be a situation where people are focusing a great deal on that. They're going to see Nooney Murray, that great size with Auden Tate and Keith Gavin, and I think that could create some really good opportunities for the tight ends.
Oh, and I'm with you there. It's certainly a thing that I don't think teams have had to respect over the last couple of years with Florida State, that if you start doing it again, you open up a new part of that offense. Ira, I know we're up against a break, but thanks so much for taking a lot of time out today and talking with us.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care.
All right, folks, we're putting a ball on it right after this. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio is presented by TNT Golf Cart Super Center, your one-stop shop for all your outdoor entertainment. Here's Ryan Kelly.
Putting a bow on it here, Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio. Ryan Kelly here. Get ready to close up shop, hand it on over to Mike and Mike. But before we do, I didn't get a chance to tell you guys last week. Went and saw Dunkirk, and you should go see that movie too. I'm not, listen, I wish I was getting paid by Christopher Nolan to promote his movies, but that thing is great. And if you like Chris Nolan, you're going to like that movie a lot. If you like war movies, you're going to like it a lot. There's barely, it's a PG-13 movie. Not very strong language outside of a couple instances. No real blood and guts. Once again, PG-13 movie. And yet it's as effective of a war movie as you will ever see. So make sure you go see that. However, according to Rotten Tomatoes and according to just the title in common sense, don't go see the Emoji Movie, which is currently sitting at an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. And if you ever wanted to feel better about yourself and about where you are in life, go read the blurb, just the blurbs. Don't even go read the reviews for this on Rotten Tomatoes. Just read the blurbs that include such thing as, quote, a soulless endeavor and a painful viewing experience. Your kids deserve better. Roger Moore says of Movie Nation, it's T.J. Miller's ticket to oblivion. Yikes. Excuse me while I scan my phone for the vomit emoji. Hear that, it's the end of the world. Do yourself a favor, swipe left on this one. And then finally, it's one of the most dark, dismaying films I've ever seen, much less one ostensibly made for children. Yikes. My thanks to Ira Schoffel for joining us today. We're slated to have Ryan Clark and Gene Williams on tomorrow. Don't know if we're going to get them both, but that's the plan for now. We'll see you tomorrow here on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Warchant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. Warchant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WARCHANT30. That's WARCHANT30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WARCHANT30. Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.
Hey, thanks for downloading today's show. If you haven't already, why don't you rate and subscribe us? We certainly do appreciate it, and of course, we appreciate you listening anyway, so just go ahead and click that right there. You know you want to. Come on. Come on. Thanks again for letting us do the show. We love giving you all the football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, all year round. Not just football season, not just spring practice, but hopefully giving you the freshest and newest FSU content every day. Thanks, guys.